How's it going, everybody? This is the Nitty Gritty. My name is Chad. With me, as usual, is Leonard, and this is a show about wrestling. And we are going to be covering one of my favorites growing up, and that is Ray Traylor. We are going to be covering all of the gimmicks that he presented to us, and we're going to be ranking them. Big Boss Man was a big part of my youth. We'll get more into that as we go. But yeah, he was always one of my heroes. So, Leonard, this was your choice. So take it away.
Yes. So I'll talk a little bit when we get there about where this idea came from to do this. So when this isn't a full spotlight, but just a little background. Ray Washington Traylor Jr. was born May 2nd, 1963 in Marietta, Georgia. He died at the age of 41 on September 22nd of 2004 of a heart attack, and he was inducted by his former manager Slick into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2016. As part of one of his most famous characters, he really was a corrections officer in Cobb County, Georgia, and started training for wrestling at that time, debuting for Jim Crockett Promotions in 1985 as a jobber. Dusty Rhodes saw potential in him, pulled him off of TV for about 12 weeks, and then brought him back repackaged as a bodyguard for Jim Cornette. So, in rough chronological order, here are the 10 gimmicks slash characters slash tweaks to those characters that we're going to be ranking in rough chronological order. So, we have Big Bubba Rogers, the original version from 85 to 87. War Machine from 1987, which was a one-off replacement for J.J. Dillon in War Games on the Four Horsemen team after Dillon got injured in one of those matches on the Great American Bash Tour. Big Boss Man, the original version from 88 to 90 in the then World Wrestling Federation, now World Wrestling Entertainment, who was a heel managed by Slick and at one point part of the Twin Towers with Akeem the African Dream. We have Face Boss Man from 90 to 93 in WWE. We have his return to WCW in 1993 as the Boss, followed by the Guardian Angel in 1994, followed by him turning back into Big Bubba Rogers as a heel from 95 to 97 as part of the Dungeon of Doom and then the NWO. Then wrestling under his real name as Ray Traylor in WCW from 97 to 98. He then returns to WWE as the Big Boss Man once again, who we're calling the Attitude Era Boss Man from 98 to 2000. And then what I have termed as either Random Tag Team or End of the Road Boss Man, which was from 2000 to 2003, kind of that nebulous period between the Attitude Era and the Ruthless Aggression era where he was still hanging around. So we're going to go from worst to best of what we think his different characters and character tweaks were over time. And since I set everything up, Chad, I will let you go first with your number 10.
All right. Well, my number 10, and before I start, I think that, Leonard, I would bet that you and I have slightly different opinions here.
I think so. I think our top maybe 3 might be the same, but everything below might be mixed up.
So my number 10 is going to be the Big Bubba Rogers from the Dungeon of Doom NWO era from 95 to 97. And the reason I say that is because I think that his run with and against the NWO is the textbook example of how the NWO was watered down. It is a textbook example of how kind of lazy the booking was in WCW at that time. Just random guys beating down random faces. Like, it wasn't interesting. I didn't really watch WCW, and this was one of the reasons why. The matches weren't interesting. The finishes were always the same. The NWO just attacked people. There was no rhyme or reason for it. And this was just Ray Traylor kind of hanging around with nothing to do. And, the Dungeon of Doom period, like there's a lot of this that runs together. Again, as WCW was transitioning, you know, he was there, but they were in the midst of changing, whereas his peak had already passed, and he was still a good worker. He was just trying to find a place for himself there. So that is my number 10.
So a lot of what you say actually plays into my number 10, even though it's not the same. I went with Ray Traylor. So that brief period from 97 to 98 when he was still with WCW, but I think that was even more than that previous era, worse for him. The roster was really bloated at that time. They didn't know what to do with most of the guys. And, when they take someone and they're basically using their real name,
Yeah.
that says, we don't really have anything for you creatively.
Right.
And he was aligned with the Steiner brothers at the time, but that didn't really go anywhere because Scott wound up turning and joining the NWO. It was supposed to be him trying to form this alliance to go against the NWO after he was fired. And to me, this was a period I didn't remember at all until we started reviewing, for this. So for all those reasons, I made that number 10. But that does tie into a lot of what you were saying with that version. And I'll just go ahead and say now that was my number 9 was the Big Bubba Rogers and the Dungeon of Doom NWO era. And again, that was for a lot of the reasons you stated, was he was just sort of there. If you start naming Dungeon of Doom members or NWO members, it would take you a while to get to Big Bubba Rogers. So yeah, I mean that was my 10 and my 9. I'll just go ahead and say that your 10 was my 9 now. So now you're 9.
Yeah. So my 9 was Ray Trailer from
There you go.
1997. And I tried to prepare a little bit for some of these random gimmicks, and I listened to a little bit of Eric Bischoff clip from his podcast talking about Ray Traylor in the NWO, and just basically saying that that it didn't fit, it was miscasting, and the reason I would put him at 9 and the Big Bubba Rogers NWO stuff at 10 is because I remember, for whatever reason, randomly checking out his debut as the just Ray Traylor. I remember the promo of him talking about the other gimmicks and just being like, my name is Ray Traylor. And like, that was kind of it. For whatever reason, I remember that promo. So for that slight reason, I'm going to make it 9. But as Leonard said, and as I already said, just to restate, like, he was there to pick up a paycheck, as many guys in WCW were at this time. He still had some stuff to give, but he was not really given anything creatively to do other than, you're going to get beat up by the NWO on a regular basis. And he would come out and he would still do his big boss man poses and all that kind of stuff. And like the crowd just, it's not, I wouldn't even say it's against him. The crowd just didn't want the 80s vibe anymore. They just, at that time, and he fell into that. So that is my number 9. Leonard, why don't we go to your number 8 then?
Oh, okay. So my number 8 was Guardian Angel. So for those of you who may not know, this was a real organization aimed at unarmed crime prevention starting in the New York City subways. And I actually did watch a bit of a podcast where Eric Bischoff talks about this, and he takes full responsibility for this. That I guess the guy whose name escapes me that was the head of the Guardian Angels came and talked to him about possibly working together. And while this is a great organization, and yeah, you may be able to make a wrestling character out of it, kind of like what you said, Big Bubba Rogers is not a good fit for the NWO. I don't think he was a good fit for this Guardian Angel character. He looked very silly in the outfit. The sketches that they do, which you can find on YouTube to set up the character, were also very silly. He was still getting kind of a push at this time as a face, but that really dissipated within a couple months of him turning into the Guardian Angel. So is for looking silly and being silly for him personally. That's why that's my number 8.
It is my number 8 as well.
Maybe we're going to be more close on this than we think.
Yeah, for much of the same reasons that Leonard said. This was when WCW had to distance themselves from anything close to a big boss man type gimmick. And so they went with this gimmick, which is the Guardian Angel. And, if you weren't in New York City and didn't know who this organization was, even if you checked out the vignettes where they talk about it, you didn't know what this was about and you didn't care. All you knew was Big Boss Man has a silly outfit on and a silly beret, and we don't get it. And you could sum up the Guardian Angel by saying that we don't.
Mhm.
And even they were trying to hold on to the fact, and I'll get more into this with the other WCW gimmicks. They're trying to hold on to the fact that the Big Boss Man was a guy from WWF who still did have some name value and some recognition, and they were still trying to hold on to that while at the same time knowing that they couldn't get close to that character. Nobody knows what a guardian angel is. Everybody knows what a corrections officer is. Everybody knows what somebody from law enforcement is. Like, that's easily identifiable. You got to be easy to identify. And when he came out in this outfit, it's just like, okay, what are we doing? Let's move on. So, Leonard, you're number 7.
7, yeah. So number 7, I have End of the Road Random Tag Team Boss Man, because at least he was still on WWE television and was given some credence and some stuff to do. It was just much lower on the card. He found himself as cannon fodder and things like the Royal Rumble. He was kind of a tag partner to some newcomers to get them over, like Bull Buchanan and Prince Albert. So he was still on TV. He just was not nearly as big as he had been in the Attitude Era. So I think it was, checking out some of the things during this period, it was kind of sad to see him towards the end of his career. So this was kind of an ebb, but again, I think you could say easily it was better than the 3 things that we've talked about already.
So my number 7 is War Machine from
Okay.
1987. And the reason is because how many people out there, even wrestling fans, even remember that he did this? Like,
True.
that's kind of why I put it here. Like, the War Games match was really cool. I think that this was the second run of those, and Leonard already said like where the character filled in. Cool name, and cool that he was getting some work, but this was such a short blip on the radar that it's barely, I think, able to qualify for this list. So that's why I put it here at number 7, because basically, cool name.
So I had War Machine at 6.
Right.
And that was kind of because you said, you remember the Ray Traylor character. I remember as a kid seeing in the magazines and hearing on WCW TV about the War Machine. And I was like, oh, who is War Machine? What is this guy? And it's sort of an Easter egg. At the time, I didn't know who it was. Now I do. As you said, it was a cool name, at least as opposed to some of these other random gimmicks where he wasn't given much to do. He was being put over as partner of the Horsemen. He's monster dude in a mask. He's the guy we're bringing in to replace J.J. Dillon, who got injured for these War Games matches. So even though it's a blip, I think it's a positive blip. And again, like you said, you had a positive memory of Ray Traylor. I have a positive memory of War Machine.
Fair enough. And my number 6 is Random Tag Team Big Boss Man, which Leonard already talked about. I remember this period very briefly. This was, again, similar to the era in W where he was just kind of hanging around and still finding work to do. The reason why I put it higher up on the list is because it is the Big Boss Man. And I think that he could offer the talent a lot at this point. Certainly, I feel like some of these veterans who are around at this time, it's like invaluable advice to be in the ring with some of these guys. Obviously his health probably wasn't the best at this time, but yeah, so this is just kind of one of those entries where I didn't really know where to put it, and I didn't think it was as bad as some of the ones I mentioned already. Yeah. And I certainly didn't think it was as good as the ones I will mention. So it kind of falls right here in the middle of the road.
Makes sense. So number 5, I have The Boss. As has happened in WCW in the past, they got snagged for copyright infringement as this character was seen as being way too close to the Big Boss Man character from WWE. And one of the Guardian Angel promos I found, they even talk about an angle where Nick Bockwinkel, as WCW commissioner, strips the boss of everything he had, his nightstick, his handcuffs, even his name. And that was what led to the Guardian Angel gimmick. Why I have this so high is at the very least you can say the boss was given an initial push with a feud against Vader. And you could tell that they were pushing him for main event or near main event status, like when Davey Boy Smith first came over to them. And this was a character that encouraged me to do this list because I fell down a rabbit hole of watching some old WCW pros on YouTube, and it came up a promo promoting the Vader versus the Boss match, and I went, "Oh yeah, he was a Boss Man ripoff when he first came back before turning into Big Bubba Rogers again." So that was what made me think, "Oh, he's had more characters than you would think, and more gimmick tweaks than you would think." So this was the one that gave me the idea to do this ranking. So 5, I have the Boss.
It was my number 5 as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's as close as they could get at the time, and it was only for a short time. But the fact of the matter is, he had burned himself out a little bit in WWF, and he went to WCW, and he had a fresh slate of opponents. And Leonard mentioned Big Van Vader, and there was matches with Rick Rude as well. And he was able to kind of do the Hogan thing in being this guy from WWF that's now here in WCW, and look at all these new guys he can face, and we know who this person is, and we're going to give him a little bit of a push. I liked, this is kind of a precursor to that Attitude Era gear in that it's the darker law enforcement outfit, and which I thought was cool. So yeah, I mean, there isn't a ton of stuff to say about the boss, but I think that it was, even though it was clearly just them trying to capitalize on WWF popularity, it worked because the Boss Man was still a commodity. So
yeah. So number 4, I have Attitude Era Big Boss Man. And this is, it's high, even though there are some very laughably bad angles and matches here, like the feud with Al Snow and the Kennel from Hell match, and the feud with Undertaker ending in the worst Hell in a Cell match ever at WrestleMania. There's the feud with the Big Show where he's dragging the Big Show's dad's coffin around a graveyard. But still, and this is why it's so high for me, is that the Boss Man was very, very prominent in the corporation and corporate ministry. Often their job guy, but always portrayed as a tough dude and their enforcer. I also liked the darker outfit that you mentioned that he had at this time, which was modernized from the old cop outfit. He was a hardcore champion several times during this period. He was tag champs with Ken Shamrock during this period. So say what you want about the bad feuds, he was still very much a top guy getting a lot of TV time during this period.
yeah, I agree. It's my number 4 as well. And some of the matches you mentioned, Big Show and Undertaker and Al Snow, I think fall into the so bad they're kind of entertaining category of pro wrestling.
Sure.
Maybe I mean, like, gosh, he had a WrestleMania match against the Undertaker, and he was hung. Like, I mean, that's he's kind of in a class of his own in that way, right? Against the Satanic Undertaker,
Raising.
which is one of my favorite versions of the Undertaker. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, he was a prominent face, and you know what? I feel like he got a renewed energy during this time. Like, he had a lot to offer as a talent, and he probably had a lot to offer the younger people as well. The gear he had on was like this, riot gear that really worked for him. He was in much better shape at this time, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you could tell that by his energy in the ring. So yeah, this period, I mean, this was kind of like, for me, a marriage of two worlds. It's like a guy from my youth, and like now I'm back into wrestling again because of Stone Cold and The Rock, but yet the Big Boss Man is there as well, which to me was really, really cool. So yeah, that's why I had this high.
Yeah, of WWE, he's one of the few, I'm trying to think, 80s guys that were around for the Attitude Era, at least
Right.
on their side, so
Right.
that really said something. about that for him. So number 3, I have the original run of Big Bubba Rogers. Even though he didn't wrestle much during this time, he didn't need to. Rogers had a great look, was very menacing, just standing behind Cornette during promos, not saying anything, looking like a Blues Brother on steroids. He had the look, he had the attitude. It was great to get a green guy like he was at the time with high potential TV time to develop and to build. So the return to Big Bubba later on was much watered down from what this initial character was.
Yeah, it's my number 3 as well. Maybe we'll see if our top 2 are the same, but
Yeah.
yeah, I really discovered the original run of Big Bubba Rogers kind of late, and it was because of some of the DVDs that WWE released over the years. Some of his Mid-South or UWF, whatever you want to say, some of his stuff there is really, really underrated. Like, if you really wanted to look at some of the work that he could do in the ring and how good he was as a big, agile guy, there's plenty of WWF matches, but, you could view some of these as well. I mean, he was UWF champion several times, and he had some really good matches with Dr. Death Steve Williams that are worth checking out. I believe they're on, one of the DVD sets out there. So, yeah, that's why I had this at number 3, because this is what, after all, this is what put him on the map. This is what showed Vince that he could be a part of that 80s, popularity.
Yeah, I neglected to mention his UWF stuff, but it ties into the same period. He was playing the same characters, the same character, same time period over there. So number 2, I have Big Boss Man as a face. So he got a good push during this time. And while the feud with Nails was a bust, I thought the stuff he was doing with Bobby Heenan and the Heenan family was pretty good. That was mostly due to Heenan cutting funny promos on Boss Man's mom. There was a jailhouse match with the Mountie that a lot of people remember. I think that falls into the so bad it's good category, especially the aftermath where the Mountie had to go to jail. I'll talk more about this when we get to number 1, but definitely I think he had lost some of his edge here from my number 1, but he was still getting a really good push and getting some really good feuds at this time as a face.
All right. So, I'm going to do what you did at the top here, Leonard, which is I'm going to kind of do my 2 and 1 and together.
Okay. Go ahead.
And so my number 2 is the Big Boss Man, the heel run with the Twin Towers and his push at that time as a top tier heel against Hogan and Savage. I mean, this was just great stuff. And he and Akeem, you look at like the skyscrapers, isn't that what they were called in WCW?
The Twin Towers. No, skyscrapers in WCW.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, basically kind of comparing the Twin Towers to two, like you have 2 huge guys, and as intimidating as like the skyscrapers were, like Akeem and the Big Boss Man, I mean, that is such a crazy team to look at. Big Boss Man was much heavier in this period, but still just as agile and, able to move around the ring. So I loved his tag team work. They had some great matches against the Mega Powers, not the Mega Powers Foundation, but the cage match against Hogan is one of Hogan's better matches when he was the heel factory Hogan. And I watched that one many times on one of the many Hulkamania VHS releases that were put out in stores when I was a kid. So yeah, I love the heel Boss Man as well. But to segue into my number 1, the Big Boss Man face is what I remember most fondly about my youth. And much of what Leonard said is very true, which is he didn't have as much of an edge. And some of his feuds were silly. But yet, knowing that, looking back on some of those feuds, he was in some of these main event slots and some of these high profile feuds that were cartoonish because the crowd loved him and wanted to see him, and they had to find stuff for people that would be against him. The Mountie, Nails, like just ridiculous stuff now looking back. But this is how much I like the Big Boss Man. I actually ran up to get this before we started to record, Leonard. I've had this for over 35 years.
Whoa.
This is a genuine nightstick that my father probably shouldn't have, but did allow me to buy at a flea market when I was very little. We were at flea markets, for those of us who are younger, were much more prominent when I was a kid, and
Yes.
you could buy anything from toys to car parts to weapons, and weapons were available. And this guy, I think, had throwing stars and knives and all that kind of crap. But I saw the nightstick, which Big Boss Man had, and I just had to have it. And I unfortunately used it on many relatives who still remind me of that fact to this day. And so I was a Big Boss Man fan from the get go. And you know, I think the best memory I have of him as a face would probably be the WrestleMania 7 match against Mr. Perfect, where he was trying to get the Intercontinental title and Andre came down. That was probably the height of him as a face, I would say. But yeah, so these two, very close for me. I had to go with the face just because, when I was a kid, I loved, the heroes of WWF. So Leonard?
So you went with the nostalgia factor. I kind of went with the now looking back factor.
Right.
And everything you said about heel boss man is 100% true. WWF was killing it with intro promo videos at this time, and Boss Man was really set up big time before coming in. Sometimes this man would bring in real life for a character, and it really works here with Traylor because he was a former corrections officer. He brought real authenticity to the character. There was a good look. The use of the nightstick, which you mentioned, and the handcuffs was great. Some say maybe Team with a Keen was a bit oddball, but as you said, they looked great together. They looked intimidating together. They had a main event feud with the Mega Powers. They were in a lot of very high profile matches. They got a big push at the time. The cage match that you mentioned with Hogan is probably one of Hogan's better WWF matches from the period. And I think I want to say it was Bruce Pritchard, but I know I heard someone in a podcast talk about that when they were asked. And they said Hogan liked Boss Man. He trusted Boss Man. And if you go and you look, the people that Hogan liked to be in the ring with, he would put over. He wouldn't job, but he would sell. He would
Yeah.
maybe go out of his way. If I remember right, there was a superplex in that cage match, which you never saw with Hogan. So I think that says a lot for him there. So yeah, I mean, we're real close. The difference is you went with nostalgia, and I went with looking at it objectionably now. What I thought was better, and that was the heel run.
All right. Well, let us know what Big Boss Man, Ray Traylor gimmicks you liked best. I'm sure there are some fans out there of his WCW era stuff that might feel differently about where we ranked some of those, but please let us know. Leonard and I grew up with, WWF, so we
Sure.
obviously rank those very high. But yeah, let us know. Again, I was very sad when he passed away, and because I remember him very fondly, even though I didn't care for some of the gimmicks that he had in WCW. I still look back at I was always checking in to see what he was doing.
Mhm.
So yes, let us know what you thought, and check out our other episodes as well. What's that card? Segment surgery, stupid questions, random match reviews, and we're also available wherever you listen to podcasts. For Leonard, my name is Chad, and we will see you next time.